the tech world. And so all those tech nerds really appreciate the IBM heritage and the wonderful things that went on there. So I think you will get really a kick out of that. So we really have multiple facilities that we're going to be sharing this wonderful history with. Thank you all for coming. Please consider joining as a member and following us on our various social media. Friend us on Facebook and all that. We have a lot of good posts, including about IBM, but all sorts of things. I know a lot of you probably lived here quite a long time, and I think you might find it interesting. And thank goodness we're starting up our regular lecture series and so on. Let me tell you briefly about a couple that are coming up. May 18th is actually the Historical Society's 50th anniversary, real 50th anniversary. So we have a theme called Where Were You in 72? In May 13th, we have a 2 p.m. lecture. We're calling it Town Hall Tea Time. And the theme is Foods of the 70s. It's going to be really, really funny. And in June 1st, we're going to have Fashions of the 70s. And I'm actually working with the young whippersnappers at the THOS Fashion School, which is just up the road. It's like 2 blocks away. And they're so cute because I showed them all these 70s magazines. We have a whole collection, the whole decade. Fiesta magazine, it was called. Okay, it was local. They were gaga over it. Oh my God, look at this. Oh my God. And they've got their cameras and everything. Isn't that sweet? Anyway, so since that was the best era of fashion, in the history of fashion, my personal opinion, they're going to create designs inspired by things like bell bottoms and hip huggers and stuff like that. Isn't that fun? Anyway, without further, thank you so much for coming. Enjoy, and of course you know this guy here. He's going to give you a fabulous talk. Pete.
Thank you. We're very fortunate to have the Historical Society and specifically Susan as part of cheering us on. She has both captured the history, the legacy, and the future of IBM here. And she has maintained all of us very, very active in completely coordinating and maintaining and codifying the history of IBM. So this exhibit took a lot of work and a lot of dedication, and fortunately we were able to receive a lot of the donations that you've all made into the group, and that's what makes it so special, because you can go there and say, yeah, I worked on this, and this was actually my PC, and here's how it turns out. One of the things that is very, very important for our community is the legacy of innovation that we have created, okay? So we were very fortunate to work on some of the most exciting projects along the world, okay? Including the personal computer, including robotics, including speech recognition, including artificial intelligence, and a variety of different products, including speech recognition. But because a lot of the talent stayed within Boca Raton, we're seeing now the emergence of an awful lot of technology that our roots come back to the time of IBM. So part of this conversation today is exactly that. Here's some of the advancements that we have made in the technologies that stem back to our days when we were doing engineering, okay? So most of the conversation is related to artificial intelligence. You're hearing a lot of artificial intelligence nowadays, but let's put it in the framework of what its problems are actually being solved by artificial intelligence. And a lot of them related to health. So everything I'm going to talk about today is not storybooks or theory or anything else. These are actually projects that we're working on right now in my companies, okay? So let's go back a little bit. When was the first time you heard the word artificial intelligence?
Steven Spielberg.
When?
Steven
Spielberg. Actually, back in 1968, NASA was working on a lot of technology, and the first time artificial intelligence and neural networks were used as a term. Now, it never has taken off, primarily because we didn't have the compute power to solve the problems that are necessary to feed the algorithms. So one of the fascinating things is we all know, or a lot of us know Moore's Law, right? Moore's Law, Hal remembers it well. He actually is computing doubles, compute processing doubles every 2 years. So think of the fascinating thing that since 1968, when that equation was initially formulated, the personal computer and computing period has doubled in processing capability since 1968. Okay? Anybody hear a term called singularity? Okay. So singularity is a point in time where the compute power of a computer is equivalent to that of a human brain. Okay? That's expected to be out in the year 2050. So we're not that far out. So think of a computer that can actually do the processing of a human mind within 25 years. But if you follow Moore's law, what happens 2 years after 2050? It doubles, and then it doubles again, and it doubles again. So we're at a very, very exciting time in terms of the type of problems that we're going to be able to fix and work on. Artificial intelligence. There are 3 things that artificial intelligence computers do that we typically have not done to date. For the most part, computers today add, subtract, multiply. We move things around, we store and retrieve information. Artificial intelligence changes those rules. There are 3 things that you should know. The first one is it actually recognizes patterns. Recognizes patterns in the data, whether it be visual data, text data, voice data. It recognizes patterns by compressing all of that information and analyzing the data into patterns that a human being could never possibly understand. We as humans can typically handle a 2x2 matrix. These are n by n, very, very large and very complex. But when you start looking at some of the very key applications of artificial intelligence now in pattern recognition, imaging, radiology is a very, very important one. Speech recognition being used to break an awful lot of the code related to it. So one is pattern recognition. The second one is reasoning. A computer will actually say, here's the data, but here's why it makes sense in this situation and not that situation. That's contextual reasoning. So it said, I'm not just giving you the data, I'm telling you why it's important or what it means. Okay? So you have the recognition and the reasoning. And the third one is the computer learns. This is the area that it's called machine learning. So with every transaction, it gets smarter. And not only because it's intuitively getting smarter, the computer is reprogramming itself automatically. Okay? So the code that was originally written changes over time, and what the programmer actually wrote into the computer can change in a week, in a month, in a year, so to the point that you don't know it anymore who actually wrote this thing. That's good, but it comes with a set of concerns as well. Okay? So those are the 3 things: pattern recognition, contextualizing, and machine learning. So what is it that we're able to do with that kind of capability now? So we started choosing some of the most hideous problems that we have in the world, many of them related to health, and it said, how do we apply that level of intelligence now to solve some real world problems? Turns out at the University of Miami, there was a highly skilled geneticist, Dr. Klaus Waringa, that he was taking about 3 or 4 days to analyze a child with a rare genetic disease. There's 7,000 diseases that a kid could have that are of genetic, that are rare. Okay, 7,000. So it was taking a long period of time to do one case. So he was taking about 3 or 4 days to do one case. By the way, the backlog to get to see Dr. Waringa was about 9 months. Okay? So what he said was, What if we actually take my brain and put it into software? He had a very specific process to analyze the data. The filtering that he went through was very, very structured. So we started codifying into algorithms his thought process. Artificial intelligence took his mind and put it into software. We were able to reduce the time that it takes to do one case from 3 or 4 days to 10 seconds. 10 seconds with much higher accuracy, repeatability, and scalability. So now we've done 150,000 cases using this technology across 40 countries, across 600 different institutions, with 1,600 different geneticists around the world. Why? We put it up on the web. We put it as a software as a service model, so no longer do you have to download a lot of software and go through all the complexity and the licensing and everything else. A geneticist comes on with the portions of the chromosome that they're interested in analyzing, puts it into the machine, and within 10 seconds, you're getting the data back. Let's put that in perspective. There are 4 million kids born in this country every year. 1 out of 10, or 400,000, is predisposed to a rare genetic disease. That doesn't mean they're going to have it, but they have the predisposition. So at any point in time, a child can become symptomatic. But here's what we know. On average, it takes 5 years and about 7.8 physicians to properly diagnose a child. So that's 5 years of anguish, of torture of a child, of biopsies, of medications, of surgeries, of let's try this, let's try that. I know a specialist, I know there's a special routine. 5 years. But if we're able to actually, instead of doing the last test that we do it as the first test that we do, what happens? Let me give a real life case. One of the more gratifying, but also one of the more torturous things that we go through is we actually talk to the parents of kids that are being afflicted and the cases that we're working with. So this was a young girl that at 2 was diagnosed with a autoimmune disease of the liver. So she started with the test and let's do the biopsy and let's do this and let's take this out, let's put in the hospitalization. These are the babies that are called million-dollar babies by the insurance company. That's how much it costs the insurance companies and the parents on a yearly basis to maintain this child without knowing what's going on with the child, because it takes 5 years to figure out what's going on. Okay? So by doing the analysis very early on, one, you can bypass those 5 years and get it done very quickly. So this child not only had the initial diagnosis of autoimmune, so she goes through a lot of testing and they talk to the geneticist and the geneticist said, I think it's this genetic kind of condition. I said, what does he know? So they kept on testing and testing. Finally, he winds up with our geneticist and they take it through our software. Bingo. By the way, it was what originally was discounted 3 years previous. And you know what the solution was to this child? And a child that, you look at her picture and said, something wrong with the child, is just not growing properly, going through all kind of conditions. The solution was a change in the diet. Reduce the amount of protein, increase the amount of enzymes, the child starts thriving. And within 2 years, the child has blossomed back to, very, very healthy life. Likewise, 2 weeks ago, we were working on another child here in Boynton that 2 weeks old, and they had already taken out the gallbladder. Now they wanted to replace the liver, and they said, before we go on, can you guys get involved in this thing? And, the first thing you do is just do the genetic, because there are 3 outcomes that can come out of this thing. First, here's a disease, and there's a known solution. Second, here's the disease, and there's no known solution. Quit testing. Do not torture the child anymore. There is no solution. And the third is, it's not a genetic condition. Quit testing this and quit with the assumptions. So That project, which is called GINA, Genetic Analyst, now we've commercialized. So we took what were the original algorithms from University of Miami, did the technology transfer on it. We licensed the software itself and created a platform as a software as a service. And we got 1,600 geneticists right now using this thing worldwide. Second thing that it does, aside from doing one kit at a time, you actually create a massive database for research purposes. So imagine the value of this to a Johnson & Johnson, which is developing a lot of products for kids. Or imagine the value of the data if you can capture the genome of a child. Think of the 90-year value of that information. Because when was the last time you had a genetic test? Aside from the 23andMe, I haven't, okay? But it's typically when we have a situation. Number one usage of genetic testing right now is for cancer patients. Well, what were you like the day before you got the cancer? That's actually magic because that's your baseline. That's what we need to understand. So by capturing the human genome as early as possible, that's very good. What's very comforting is that to get a genetic test, it's a swab of the cheek or spit. It's saliva. It's no longer blood. So the process is very quick. To give you a perspective, and the reason we started this conversation with the speed of technology, 20 years ago, when the human genome was originally decoded, it took about a month on one of the largest supercomputers in the world and about $1 billion to do that. Today, you can do a full genome sequence on an individual in an hour for less than $100. So what we're doing now is putting health on the back of the technology curve and accelerating our path to knowledge. That's very, very important. So when you see these advancements being so radical, it says we're able to solve big, big problems now. Anybody familiar here with, anybody familiar with 23andMe? Okay, we've all done it. And that's primarily recreational genetics, social genetics. The first thing we were trying to understand is what is our ancestry? And they give you some ideas also about some of your health characteristics, but that's a very consumer-driven product. However, now you start taking a look at what the value of data is nowadays. Think of the value of data as being higher than the value of the dollar. Okay? The database that 23andMe has 10 million records in it. 23andMe did their IPO. They went public 6 months ago at $3.75 billion. That's equivalent to $375 per record. They lose money every time you spit in the cup. They make money on licensing the data to Pfizer, Genentech, Glaxo, and all of these related companies. Huge for research purposes. So they're willing to pay exorbitant amount of dollars for the data itself. Give you another point in the spectrum. There was a company called Flatiron from New York that actually licensed their database, which was only 25,000 records, but of a very unique cancer. 25,000 records. They were acquired by Roche Pharmaceutical 2 years ago for $1.9 billion. That's equivalent to $75,000 per record. That's the value of this data because that's the path to drug discovery, to search, to improve the science and improve the technology, but also improve the business models. What is actually fueling the innovation? You gotta have money. You cannot have 2 out of 3. You gotta have the scientist, the engineer, and the entrepreneur. Okay? Any questions on that project so far?
Can I go back to something you said?
Yeah.
Where they were taking out the growth body,
Mm-hmm.
and we found out that this wasn't the way to go. How did the doctor accept that?
Great question. How did the doctor accept the findings of It depends on the maturity of the doctor. There are going to be some that I don't want to hear about it, that's fairy dust and everything else. The more advanced ones jump all over it, and it said, oh my God. So what we've seen is the adoption primarily from the geneticists, because we said at no point in time do we intend to replace you. We're aiming to provide you tools and technologies to help you do your job better. So the key is they're making more money. Second, they're providing greater value to their clients, their patients. And third, they're having much more turnover. They can get to see many, many more patients along the way. Anytime you sprinkle artificial intelligence nowadays on something, the value goes up. So you got to have some kind of artificial intelligence, and this gives them a very easy way to get into the business without spending an awful lot of money. Great question. Yeah?
What about testing every child that's born, or making it available to parents for testing?
Exactly. So what about testing every child that is born? Actually, every child that is born today, we prick their foot, we take a blood sample, and we test for 34 diseases here in the state of Florida, okay? Why don't we test for 7,000, okay? Right. And that's where we're going with this thing. So we're providing a lot of the value now to all of the neonatologists, the perinatologists, the fertility clinics, and it said, this is real life. I mean, the 34 different diseases that you're testing for, we test for those already. Let's test for 7,000. Child might not have these right now, but if you can give them a framework, a roadmap of what you could have at some point in time, and let the parents know, keep an eye on this thing, because if it starts developing, don't wait until the kid is very symptomatic, jump on it. Perfect question. Right, yeah?
How difficult is it to explain this and to get buy-in from traditional doctors and schools of medicine?
This is a very, very fundamental question. The question was how difficult it is to get the buy-in from the physicians and the schools of medicine. For the most part, genetics are not taught except for at a very high level to most of the kids, the students in the medical school. So they're very, very ill-trained. They're not. So the key is, how do you simplify that? So if you give them the basics of genetics and what to look for, and you give them a tool, it says, if you suspect something like this, order this test. And then it's interpreted by a genetic counselor, and then that way the doctor stays in the soup, but doesn't become a specialist. There is resistance, there's no question about it, because it's unknown, but to the degree that you can provide greater value and much more monetary compensation to the physician, now you got their attention.
How are you promoting the successes that you're having?
How much success?
How are you promoting the successes that you're having?
Yeah, so primarily within the research community to start with, then the genetic community, and now we've started doing the reach out to the physician community. For instance, the next step is the neonatologist. This is the first person that sees a child that's something not quite right with it. So now we're educating them, providing them the tools, providing them process, providing the kit, here's how you get the sample, here's how you return it, here's who analyzes it. The second one is the perinatologist. When the kid is still in the womb, the typical measurements are still sonogram and measurements, biochemical measurements of the mother. But now if you can actually start looking for genetic type of conditions, that's a third element in their toolkit that would be very key. And then the third piece is fertility clinics. The gene of the parents before the child is conceived. So now you got a very, very interesting track that you can say, pre-conception all the way through conception in 90 days of life. Now you got a very, very interesting pattern. Yeah. Yeah.
You're associated with a company doing work in this field. Can you tell us something about the company and the name and the website?
Sure. The company is called Sivotec. Sivotec, S-I-V-O-T-E-C, Sivotec. That stands for Signatures in Vivo, signatures in the living through technology, bioinformatics, And I started the company. I'm the CEO of it. And that's the website, cevotechbioinformatics.com. But let me take you through another thing, because as engineers, one of the things we always do is how else can I use this technology? So in working with some local physicians, that their background was work in Alzheimer's. Says Alzheimer's is a very, very difficult problem right now, not only because of the impact on society, but we still don't know the cause. I mean, clearly it's plaque, you know, so it's a lot of amyloids and things, you know, building up in the brain, and there's no cure. I mean, we deal with it, but there is no cure. But we keep testing with Petri dish mice and monkeys over and over, expecting something different to happen. We throw billions of dollars a year into these. So we said, what if at the same time that we're introducing all of these chemicals into a mouse's brain, what if we actually start creating a computer model of the brain of the mouse, so that as we start learning what are the molecular interactions at the biological level, and whenever these reactions happen, we know that to be truth. It will always happen this way. So now you start teaching the computer every time. What's so important here is that you can put a whole lot more variables in a computer than you can put in the brain of a mouse. And you can accelerate time. You don't have to wait for the computer to get smarter or die. So this is another project that we have with multiple universities right now, creating in vivo or in silico model, in this case, in silicon computer model of biological models. This is very, very cool because first, it's much more affordable, much faster, and you can get the results a whole lot more efficiently. To the point that now the FDA has started accepting computer models instead of animal models for some of the approvals, okay? And specifically in Alzheimer's, that's the path that we're going through. They're very interested in the computer models that we have created here, because it said, that's revolutionary stuff. We don't have to wait, and we don't have to go through the traditional paths that we do. Any questions?
Yeah. And what you said, we are using a number of research. Are you doing anything with scripts? Because I think they're involved with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, with multiple universities, clearly with the University of Florida, that just acquired Scripps right now. So yeah, through the back end, and also with Max Planck. Max Planck is very much into the imaging of the brain. Scripps is much more into the genetics and the biochemicals of the brain. University of Miami, very, very high institute in brain and cognition. FAU has a lot of work going on in this space as well. So this is a problem that it needs lots and lots of smart people. The good news is that the moment we get into computer language and we actually start assimilating the data from multiple places, discovery happens a whole lot quicker, because as long as it's in an individual's head, that doesn't move the data very much. Consider that a given school, a given university, Stanford University, is good as the 17 neurologists that they have on the genomic space. Well, what if we brought in 1,000 genetics into the same database, and now we start finding all kind of new patterns and reasoning related to it. So the big data models are going to create very, very disruptive, in a good way, findings. So the pace of discovery is going to happen a whole lot quicker.
What drives your strategic plan in terms of where you're going to move next?
Sometimes divine intervention. And I'd say most of the time it's divine intervention. You know, look, last time I had a biology course was 54 years ago. So far right out of my league, but fortunately surrounded by really, really smart people. And my job in this case is pull the talent and the resources together and drive the business forward. But what's happened is, because we started in genomics, which is probably one of the keys to health right now, because it's the architecture of your body. This is the framework of your body. Everything will come from your genomics, from your microbiome, your gut, and from your brain. Unfortunately, medicine has chopped up these things into very small pieces of the body. Here's the heart, and here's the kidney, and everything else, and they don't talk to each other. Okay? So one of the things that is high value is we look at the body as a system. It's dynamic. So those are the two foreign words in medicine. First, we don't look at the body as a system in medicine. It's many pieces. And second, it's a dynamic system, but it's measured statically. Only when we show up at a physician once a year do they take our vitals. What happened in the 12 months in between? That was very, very good. You always use the example of my mother-in-law, bless her soul, those souls knew her, 300-pound woman that every time my wife would take her in for a checkup, she was 84 years old, the doctor would say, oh, blood pressure is high, pulse is high. Well, you just moved a 300-pound woman. What did you expect? Well, last time you brought her in, she was, blood pressure high and pulse high. It says she weighed 300 pounds and it was still the same age. If you took her measurements when she was eating her chocolates, watching TV, I bet you it was completely great. What did you do? You threw chemicals into a body that did not need it, and now you threw everything out of whack. Okay? Very, very key. So this is an engineering approach to health, which is a big systems approach. It's the way that we all have grown up in the business. Good.
Pete, it seems like a hop, skip, and a jump that the next move is engineering superhumans using what you're learning. How much push do you get in that direction?
So there are three pieces in the evolution. So the question is, do you engineer a superhuman? The first step is actually, let's start removing some of the bad things that are in humans right now. So there are technologies called CRISPR, you might have heard of these, which you can actually go into the human genome and actually modify, turn some of the genes on and off, and eradicate some of the diseases, okay? That's doable, and that's happening right now. So the first one is remove the bad stuff. The second one is now stabilize and create some positive growth opportunities for the human, okay? So if there are limitations or predispositions to things, we can either accentuate them or do away with them. And the third, which is still some time out, is the whole concept of how do we engineer a superhuman. It's doable. It's going to take some time. It will come with an awful lot of ethical questions. I was telling Bill, I was actually Hal, I got involved with the University of Florida. They were developing an executive course in artificial intelligence ethics. Think of that, the ethics of artificial intelligence, because the number of things that we're going to be able to do, and are they right, are they wrong? There is no right answer and there's no wrong answer either, but it's going to be challenging. And the typical answer is, well, the government will figure it out. The government, don't expect the government to figure out anything.
They'll argue about it for a long time.
Regulation is the death of innovation. Regulation is the death of innovation. So keep them out of the way. We know how to engineer. We know how to drive business. We're ethical. We're professional. We're moral. And let's keep all of these other less than capable people out of the way. Okay, very, very key. You mentioned we did some work on concussion, because we were working with young athletes, and concussion is becoming a very relevant piece of work. So Major League Soccer actually hired us to do a level of analysis. They wanted to know if there was a relationship between the type of turf that the kids were running on, artificial turf or grass, and injuries. So we look at the database, 5 years worth of database, and we couldn't find something out of the ordinary. So we go back to the CEO and he said, you know, the turf is getting better. There's a little bit better bounce. The seams are shorter. So, but I said, by the way, did you capture any of the environmental information when the games were being played? He goes, like what? He said, well, temperature, humidity, altitude. No, we don't capture any of that. I said, wait a minute. If you know the city, the time and the date when the game was played, so we go to weather.com, overlay the environmental information on the injury database, and we start seeing major clusters of injuries start happening to the point that you can predict when injuries are going to happen. At an intersection of temperature and humidity, you can predict when injuries are going to happen. So we go back to the CEO of Major League Soccer and said, by the way, this is good news. It's a preventable injury. If you can anticipate that this condition is going to happen, you take an extra time out, hydrate your players, bring their temperature down, sell a commercial, you just save money and made money. He goes, whoa. He says, what else you got? He said, for some reason, within 2 weeks of a concussion, we're seeing secondary injury. I said, what is that all about? A good friend of mine who actually rehabbed Peyton Manning and Sidney Crosby and these guys had put this bug in my head that once you get your bell rung, you have a concussion, your internal clock is off for a period of time. We all come back way too soon. So when we come back, now we're running a pattern and your brain says cut, and 1/10 of a second later, your knee cuts, you just took out your ACL. And I said, what? And he said, how come we don't know this? He said, neurologist, orthopedic, do these guys ever talk? It was all in the data. And it was all back to the pattern recognition, the reasoning capability, and the machine learning related to it. All right there. So it's a great example of, you know, when you start analyzing the data. I'll give you one more example of work that we're doing. Cancer and stem cell. Okay? Stem cell, as you know, are the good cells in our body that are neutral for a lot of the expression. They haven't taken any individual characteristics. If saved at a proper point in time, the younger the better. These are healthy cells that you can save. Many of the times, it's actually, we're working with a highly skilled immunologist, oncologist here in Boynton Beach, Dr. Maharaj. And he's developed a process that he takes some of your adult stem cells, puts them back into a body that has cancer. The adult stem cells have what they're called the killer T cells, the killer tau cells. They attack the cancer cells viciously, and they do away with the cancer cells. He has patients that in 3 weeks have done away with the cancer situation and has not come back for at least 6 years since he's been doing these type of processes. So what's fascinating about it is look, I'm getting these results, but the amount of data that is associated with this thing is monstrous. I can't keep up with it. You know, just one patient produces so much information. So he said, can you codify my brain? Can you put my brain into artificial intelligence algorithms so first I can treat more people, collect more data, and then do the analysis on the data itself, because I'm probably picking up 1/10 of what I should be learning from each case. So we're working on them, and the same platform that we use for the genomic testing, we're using now for Alzheimer's, we're using it for stem cell, we're using it for cancer and such. Well, this is what engineers do, right? You develop a platform, You change the problem to the specific problem that you're trying to solve, which is the algorithms, you customize those, but everything else remains the same. But to the degree that you have genetic information, biochemical information, cognitive information into one database, then it becomes a monstrous, monstrous opportunity for you. Questions?
You maintain databases?
Yes.
How big a computer capacity do you have?
Believe it or not, we use the cloud. So we got it on AWS, on the Amazon cloud, incredibly affordable. And what's good about it is we're paying for the processing that we need and for the memory that we need. Some of these databases get very large. For instance, a human genome is about 10 gigabytes worth for one set, so it can get pricey, but it sure beats buying a supercomputer.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, the second question is, do you keep the database? So there are two points to that answer. One, we receive a lot of data from individuals. We completely de-identify the information. We at no point in time know any kid's name, okay? That's important for HIPAA purposes and such. But we keep a record, a number, an ascension number for this kid. So the question comes up, who owns the data? Well, the patient owns the data. But the moment you actually go through synthesis, analysis, and aggregation, and you're creating a new knowledge product, that's actually our property. So we have the consent forms for all of the people that said, for research and commercialization purposes, you're giving us the right to use the data.
If I wanted to do something different than you, could I buy your database?
Absolutely. And that's the model that 23andMe has been using to commercialize it. So we studied that model very, very well and see what are the legal implications of it, make sure that we got the protection. Yeah, but we're sitting in some pretty powerful databases. Yeah.
About stem cells, I was going to say, wouldn't it be wonderful if parents knew that when their babies are born, they have got this magnificent umbilical cord with the stem cells. Now, I was a medical professional for many years. I graduated from the University of Florida, and there was a big genetic section there where it was just being developed back in the 60s.
Right.
Now, I don't know, because I've been retired and that's not my field, but wouldn't it be wonderful if parents knew more about that? You hear about parents having a child that has a disease, and so they have another child so they can use their stem cells to cure the other one. Why isn't this more well known?
Yeah, there are companies that do this thing for a living. So yeah, the moment your child is born, you got some salespeople right there at the hospital saying, would you like to freeze the cord, the umbilical cord stem cell for it? And it's expensive, and I think it's about $5,000 for the initial pop and then a yearly fee for refrigerator and such. So it is processed, it is expensive for the people that can't afford to do that. Yeah, you're buying an insurance policy for your kid's life. A cheaper one is also just getting a genomic profile on the kids. If you have the combination of the two, then you have both data as well as cells to actually do some very proactive work. But absolutely, we should be getting to the point now that with volume, the costs should start going down significantly, okay? The cryogenic is still a situation that, yeah, it is a physical thing. It's not ones and zeros. It is a physical thing that you got to store and, process and such. But yeah, absolutely, yep.
Yeah, there's another area of genetics called the epigenetics.
Yes.
Where you turn on the genes of wellness and you turn off the genes of disease. Is this being considered? Are you working with epigenetics?
Yeah, so epigenetics is the notion that, or the science that your genes do change over time. What are the reasons that your genes change over time? First, it could be environmental. It can be lifestyle, your diet. It can be trauma. So a variety of different things can trigger changes in your genetic structure. The base stays the same, but there are changes in the gene sequencing that are actually turned on and off. So yes, the epigenetic is fundamental to it because we recognize that it's a dynamic body and will continue to change over time. Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
At the onset of your talk, you mentioned radiology. What are the applications in that field?
Actually, Watson supercomputer, one of the first applications was in radiology. Start taking a look at really heavy-duty imaging, CAT scans, PET scans, MRIs, and start doing analysis on them. Because it's a classic image processing capability using artificial intelligence. They got into the situation where the business model, not the technology is incredibly good, but the business model that they pushed was a little bit awkward. First, you needed a supercomputer to run it. Second, it was massive amount of complex software that you had to license. It was called Blue Mix, which is the software that was running on Watson. And third, the data was owned by the client. So IBM kept none of the data. So, they got themselves into a situation that financially it didn't close. Actually, Maria was part of some of the original work with that, and she worked with Modernizing Medicine in terms of getting the adoption. But the technology was rich and still is very rich. IBM opted to sell that business unit now, the Watson Health business unit, so that it's handled in different. But the issue was never the technology. Did I say that right? Cool. Other questions? Terrific. One more example. One of the challenges that we all have in starting up companies is funding the work. Okay? How do you find the right investor? So people that are investors, they always say, but how do I find the right company to invest in? So you go back and forth, and you said, wouldn't it be nice if you had something that could actually tie investors and investment opportunities using AI to actually bring them together? So this is, mother is the need, the
Necessity
of invention, right? Invention, need is the mother of invention, right? So I'm sitting in my office last year, and I'm going, I am terrible at raising money, but I don't think I'm the only one. So I said, there's got to be some software here that can actually link me up between what it is that we're doing. And I can't find anything. I keep giving. So I hook up with one of my buddies from MIT, and he says, let's take a really hard look. So we found a lot of crowdfunding, we found advisors, we found financial guys, we found consultants, but the matching engine, the Match.com, the dating service for investors, investment opportunity, we can't find that. So we're going through it, and he said, well, let's build it. We took the same platform that we had for the genomics, and we said, if we can get an investor to profile themselves, answer these 15 questions. What type of industry do you invest in? How much money are you looking to invest? What kind of technologies? What kind of maturity of their companies are you looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And we asked the companies, the startups, the same questions, and put your profile in here and put your investor deck and everything else, and then fire it up and let the AI go to work. So we actually built the thing. We had our development team in India actually code the thing. We're launching it here next week in South Florida. Why South Florida? Well, first we developed it here, but South Florida is white hot in terms of opportunities. So we're going to have as an alpha test, 200 startup companies and 50 investors that we're going to put into the soup. We're going to kick the tires on it, make sure that the usability is proper and the testing is proper. But think of it. Most companies, most good ideas fail because they're not funded. Most good ideas fail. So there's a massive graveyard because the people that are very good scientists and engineers are not necessarily good at raising money. They don't have this. So how do we go about doing this thing? So if we can simplify that by providing a platform, and the platform is called Raise Link, raise as in raise money link, so it's going to combine the two. So we're going to put that in play. And so think of, as an investor, I said, okay, here's my profile, and I've answered this 15 questions. You hit the button, and all of a sudden, 10 companies that you would have never found in your life start showing up. And you say, that's pretty interesting, and it actually matches my criteria in terms of the technology and the business and the industry and the region and everything. And I said, that's pretty neat, okay? I'd like to find out more. So you hit the button, and the one-pager shows up for you immediately. He said, that's still pretty interesting. I'd like to have the NDA, the Disclosure Confidentiality Agreement. You hit the button, you get it, you DocuSign it, you send it back. And he said, I'd like to have the investor presentation with the financials, and you receive them. And you take a couple of days, you analyze this thing, and he said, that's actually pretty neat. I want to talk to the executives of this company. So you go online, and there's a thing called a doodle calendar. You actually look for when they're available, and when you're available, you book the time for a Zoom call with these executives, okay? Boom, you have the meeting with them. I still like this thing. Send me the legal documents, the subscription agreement, the operating agreement. I'd like to consider investing. I'd like to understand the terms of me as an investor, what that's all about. I sign them. He said, would you like to handle the transaction for you, the monetary transaction for you, okay? So think of a process that typically takes 7 to 9 months, if ever, closes, being able to do it in a couple of weeks, much more affordably and
In 2 years, you do it in 10 seconds.
Exactly, exactly. So this is another tool, but you think of the technology just jumping from one industry to the other, which in the back end, look, we're not finance majors, we're not biologists, but the engineering, the platform development it hunts fairly well. So, yeah.
I am finance, so I'm going to ask the question. So how do you monetize what you just...
So the question is, how do you monetize something like this? First, one of the very common ways that people help others is a finder's fee. As a consultant, I will point out companies, and if they invest in your company, I'll take a 5%. I'll take a 5% of the transaction. So $1 million is invested, we get $50,000 on the transaction itself. And hopefully there'll be lots of transactions, and the machine is doing it.
Do you get anything for the link for the transfer of funds?
Yeah. So as long as you are not providing all you're doing is providing decision support. So we went through the SEC and everybody else to make sure that we're cleared. So all you're doing is either you get a broker license or whatever, but you're just managing the flow and facilitating a transaction. So one piece of the equation is on a transaction basis, you take a percentage. The second one, which is really, really interesting, is you've done enough transactions, now you got a massive amount of data about all of the trending information. Who's buying, who's selling, what region, what industry, what geography, who's interested in that data. Government, real estate agents, consultants, and on and on and on and on. So the data play, it becomes very, very significant. So it's not genetic information, it's actually financial information that you're putting in play here. Yeah. Right.
And how do you sell that?
Hmm?
How do you sell that?
How do you sell it?
Yeah.
Online.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
I mean, it's like a fixed fee or something? Where
yeah, no, we just we put it online. It's a service. We're commercializing it, so through the social media and the LinkedIn and everything else, we create a marketing campaign for it. We're starting in South Florida, so yeah, the mayor of Miami is very excited about things like this. So you know, it plays right to the hand. And the model that we use is very similar to the FUBU, for us, by us. Okay, for us in South Florida, by us in South Florida. So it's high tech for high tech. Yep. Other questions?
I just want to make
Yeah.
a comment. because all this genomics and all that seems to be headed toward good diagnosis of diseases.
Mhm.
But then there is the business of disease.
Mhm.
Diabetes could have been cured eons ago.
Yep.
But we've got the needles, and we've got the alcohol, and we got the insulin, and we got all these other companies, you know, being supported by this.
The question is the business of medicine, the business of disease, which a lot of it is in place to actually be resistance to change, because there's an awful lot of cottage industries built on the inefficiencies of health, on the diseases. The sicker you are, the more money I make. I think that's backwards, isn't it? So there's a lot of motivation to keep you treated, not cure you.
Exactly.
Okay? So, yes.
You can diagnose
I
them.
just went along with this. I've heard that China's medical model is the doctor will not be paid if the patient continues to be ill.
Exactly. So that goes back to what they used to call the barefoot doctor back when. Chinese medicine was actually an art for the most part because they studied the whole body, very holistic as we recognize it today. This is why it was called, the Oriental medicine, of sorts. The unfortunate thing, it was never codified. It was passed by a master to a master to a master, so you couldn't replicate this model. What we institutionalized was a system to do massive flow, but not personalized. So somewhere in between, and I think this is where the technology can fill a very, very interesting gap, because if we can make this technology, instead of reactive, don't wait till you're sick, but actually proactive, predictive, and personalized. Those 3 Ps, proactive, predictive, and personalized. Yeah.
Do you envision anything like in the Internet of Things where people are fitted with telemetric devices to measure key functions in mass, I mean in huge amounts of data, so that you could get profiles of almost any condition in time?
That's starting to happen. So your Apple Watch is actually capturing massive amounts of data. You have seen on TV the Cardia. I'm not sure if you've seen it. You put your fingers on it and it gives you. We work with a company that has an EEG device, actually does a scan of your brain and sees what the things are about. But to your point, this company had been going 5 years through the process of getting it certified by the FDA. That same chip they put into a Mattel toy for $75. And it was doing exactly the same thing. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
This is kind of in a way personal, but let's say there's something that runs in your family and a parent or a very close relative had it and it's fatal. Would you want to get DNA tested, not knowing if there was a cure for it?
It's up to you, but some people would say absolutely want to know. Others say no, I don't want to know. There's a responsibility. We worked a lot in Alzheimer's right now. There's a city down in Colombia. It was actually featured on 2020 about 2 years ago, Antioch in Colombia. The basis of the population is 26 families. 50% of the population is afflicted with Alzheimer's by age 30. But the question is, why not the other 50%? Okay, so that's your control group. So we spend a lot of time talking to these people. It turns out there's a lot of mines related to it, so heavy metal. So you got copper mines and a lot of stuff. We're all different. So that could be a catalyst that some people in their biochemical structure are resistant to this type of disease, some aren't. So one of the things that we're finding out, Alzheimer's is very similar to autism. It's a combination of probably 32 variables coinciding at a point in time, okay? However, if you remove one of those 32, then it doesn't happen. You think of autism, and you hear a lot of the parents say, my kid was perfectly fine until they got the vaccine for the measles and this and that, and said, well, the brother didn't get it. What was that all about? Well, the preservative for these vaccines is mercury. Mercury is a heavy metal. So, yeah, there's a lot of studies and a lot of denial, but you know, it's a big data problem. So if it is the combination of a genetic, a biochemical, a resistant, a metal, sensitivity, and everything else, that's where the big data analysis comes in and can be incredibly, incredibly valuable.
So theoretically, at some point in time, you could take enough data on me and say, Hal, I'm going to predict that you're going to die at 87 years old. And give me a distribution on both sides of that.
Yep. The question was, yeah, you can actually start doing some predictive modeling and simulation, because one of the great things about all of this technology, you can actually simulate conditions before they happen. You don't have to wait for something to happen. You can say, all right, biostatistics pretty much is what happened, and then you draw a straight line and assume that all variables are going to remain the same. Well, they're not. But if you can actually put into your model and simulate, well, what if this changes? What if this changes? And now you can start becoming reactive and predictive. Yeah, you can actually manage your timeline, given that there's no changes in it. But you can also start saying, if I change my diet, if I quit smoking, if I, then you got a pretty neat model that the insurance companies would die for, primarily because all of the actuarial tables right now are based off of, we don't know what's going to happen to you. But the moment you become personalized, there's more than abundant money in the insurance companies to actually say, you got way, way over coverage. Yeah. Marcia?
That could destroy the insurance industry.
Lately, and just basically like in the last week, there's a situation in New York where they have like a cluster of a very rare brain cancer. Have you heard it?
Yes.
So I'm just thinking the same thing as you. Why is it that some people get it and some people don't? Now they know it's involving these kids that were in high school. And they think it has to do something with some atomic research center nearby or something. But why is it that some people get it and some people don't? That might be something.
That is, because when you typically get a cluster like that, yes, you get a high percentage of the population because it's very intense at some point in time. In this one, I think it was either electromagnetic or some kind of, radon. Yeah, radon. So because it's so intense, then you become much more sensitive to it. And there's some that still will be resistant to it. But exactly right. Those are the perfect studies to make, because you said, what were the other 31 conditions that were going on in here? Yeah.
You know, what we're gonna find, I think, soon, is mothers who are pregnant who get COVID, and the baby is born with anomalies that doctors can't recognize. We have one in our family right now. A little girl, my cousin's daughter was pregnant, 6 months pregnant, got COVID, was in the hospital for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And the baby stopped growing and stopped developing, and very, very slowly. So they waited till about the 8th month to take the baby. And she was like 15 inches long and weighed a pound, whatever. And she's been in ICU for 5 months, and they still don't know. All the neonatologists have different theories. There has to be somebody that can, and how do I get help to them?
And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of confidence in the CDC and their capability to actually amass the data and trust what it is that it's been doing. But yeah, I think the COVID is going to be a spike in terms of the health, and we're going to see longitudinal perspective for many years. And we're just starting to see it, both in adult as well as the kids. And not only from the disease itself, but the mRNA is still questionable as a vaccine in some plants. So we're going to learn a lot. The only way we're going to learn a lot is we integrate all of the data and start running massive analytics. And I think the way we're chopping it up right now with, you know, the politicians involved in this thing is absolutely insane.
It's really sad, but we're gonna see a wave of that.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much for your time. Hang on. Wait.